right, so get ready, because we are diving deep today into a conflict that's both complex and incredibly relevant, the Spanish Civil War. You've sent in some really fascinating articles and notes, and I gotta say, I'm already hooked. It's amazing how this war wasn't just confined to Spain, but it became this global stage for ideologies to clash.
Yeah.
And the effects were felt far beyond Spain's borders.
It's the perfect example of what we call the butterfly effect. These seemingly insignificant moments that can set off a whole chain of events with massive and unforeseen consequences. And that's precisely what we're going to uncover today as we delve into the origins of this war.
I love that. Okay, so set the scene for us. Spain in the 1930s, what was going on?
Imagine a country teetering on the edge. You have the Second Spanish Republic. It was formed in 1931. After King Alfonso III abdicated the throne, this republic was all about modernizing Spain and tackling deep-rooted inequalities. They wanted land redistribution, labor rights, reforms aimed at creating a more just society. But these very reforms sparked fierce resistance from those in power. The church, the military, wealthy landowners, they all pushed back.
What's the powder keg?
Exactly. This clash between those pushing for change and those clinging to the old order created a deeply polarized political landscape. This context is crucial to understanding how a single event could ignite such a devastating conflict.
And that event was?
The assassination of José Calvo Sotelo. It happened in July 1936. He was a prominent right-wing politician, and his murder sent shockwaves through the nation. This event tipped the scales, pushing those military leaders already wary of the Republic's reforms into action.
Wow, it's almost unbelievable how one man's death could have such far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely. On July 17, 1936, General Francisco Franco and his nationalist faction, fueled by this event, launched a coup. And just like that, Spain was plunged into civil war.
Wow. Okay, so let's break down the two main factions here. It wasn't as simple as good guys versus bad guys, right?
Not at all. The Republicans were an incredibly diverse coalition. You had everyone from anarchists and communists to socialists and moderate Republicans, all united by their support for the Republic and the social changes it represented.
And on the other side, you had the nationalists, led by Franco. What were they fighting for?
For them, it was about restoring traditional values, reinstating the power of the Catholic Church, and eradicating leftist influence. They saw themselves as the defenders of Spain, a Spain rooted in tradition and order, threatened by what they perceived as radical and dangerous ideologies.
It's fascinating how the Spanish Civil War became this microcosm of the global ideological struggles of the time.
Exactly. And what makes it even more significant is how the conflict drew in major powers from around the world. Germany and Italy, both under fascist regimes, saw a kindred spirit in Franco and heavily supported his nationalist faction. They saw it as an opportunity to advance their own agendas and test out new military tactics.
And on the flip side,
Yeah.
you had the Soviet Union, driven by communist ideals,
Yeah.
backing the Republicans.
Yeah.
Wasn't there also something called the International Brigades?
Yes. Imagine this. Volunteers from across the globe, inspired by the Republican cause, flocked to Spain to fight against fascism. These international brigades were a testament to the global reach of this conflict, how it resonated with people fighting for similar ideals in their own countries.
Wow. So decisions being made thousands of miles away in Berlin, Rome, and Moscow were directly impacting the course of the war. It really drives home the point about those interconnected ripples, the butterfly effect in action.
Precisely. It transforms the conflict from a purely domestic struggle into a proxy war for global ideologies, with consequences that reverberate far beyond Spanish borders.
Okay, so let's dive deeper into the core messages of each side. What were the Republicans truly fighting for? We know they wanted a more inclusive Spain, but what did that look like in practice?
Imagine a Spain where democratic principles flourished, where social justice was paramount, and where secularism replaced the church's dominant role. The Republicans envisioned a nation where workers had rights, where gender equality was a reality, a Spain truly representative of all its citizens.
And how did the nationalists counter that vision? What was their propaganda like?
They very skillfully positioned themselves as protectors of tradition, Catholicism, and national unity. Their propaganda often painted a stark picture of the Republicans as a threat to Spain's very soul, an enemy aiming to destroy everything they held dear. It tapped into deep-seated anxieties about the rise of socialism and communism, fears that were echoing across Europe in the shadow of World War II.
So it was about winning hearts and minds as much as it was about winning on the battlefield.
Absolutely. Both sides understood the power of propaganda in shaping public perception, and rallying support, the Spanish Civil War became a battleground, not just for territory, but for the very narrative of what Spain was and what it could become. And it worked. After 3 years of brutal fighting, the Nationalists, under Franco's leadership, emerged victorious. This happened on April 1st, 1939. This victory ushered in a dictatorship that would last for almost 4 decades, leaving a mark on Spain, on its social, cultural, and political landscape.
It's hard to imagine the weight of that legacy. Spain was left deeply wounded, hundreds of thousands dead, countless families torn apart, and a society fractured. But you mentioned something earlier about the war's impact.
Yeah.
Extending far beyond Spanish borders.
Exactly. One of the most significant and perhaps most chilling aspects of the Spanish Civil War is the League of Nations' failure to effectively intervene. It's almost as if the world was watching, a dress rehearsal for World War II, and chose to ignore the warning signs.
Why didn't they step in? Was it purely political calculation or something more?
No. It was a complex mix of factors, remember. This was a time of immense global uncertainty. Europe was grappling with the rise of fascism and the looming threat of another world war. Many nations were hesitant to get involved in a conflict that could easily escalate and draw them into a larger war. There were also internal divisions within the League itself. Some members sympathized with the Republicans, while others were more inclined to support Franco. This lack of consensus and decisive action ultimately paved the way for Franco's victory and the consolidation of his power.
It's a haunting thought, a missed opportunity to potentially alter the course of history. What if France, Britain, or other major powers had thrown their weight behind the Republicans? Would it have made a difference?
It's impossible to say for sure, but it certainly raises a lot of questions. Could a stronger international response have prevented the horrors of Franco's regime? Could it have emboldened other nations to stand up to fascist aggression? It's another layer of that butterfly effect, the potential consequences of inaction on a global scale.
Franco wins.
Yeah.
And Spain enters this dark period of dictatorship. What was life like under his rule?
Imagine a society shrouded in fear and silence. Franco's regime was built on a foundation of repression. Censorship was rampant. Any dissenting voices, any criticism of the regime was swiftly silenced. Political opponents were persecuted, imprisoned, or forced into exile. It was a time when people lived in constant fear of the knock on the door, always watching what they said, even within the confines of their own homes.
So even though the war was over, those internal divisions and anxieties continue to shape everyday life.
Absolutely. And that experience of living through the war, of witnessing such brutality and division, profoundly shaped how people navigated life under Franco's regime. For many, it fostered a sense of resignation, a belief that resistance was futile. But for others, it fueled a burning desire for change, a determination to fight for a better future, even in the face of overwhelming odds.
And that's where those sparks of resistance come in, right? Even amidst this atmosphere of fear and oppression, there were still those who dared to challenge the regime.
Exactly. The Spanish Civil War, despite its tragic outcome, became a rallying cry for anti-fascist movements worldwide. The bravery of the international brigades, the sacrifices made by those fighting for democracy, these stories resonated with people far beyond Spain's borders. They became symbols of hope, reminders that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure and resist tyranny.
It's fascinating how the war, well, obviously a period of immense suffering, also became this catalyst for future movements, for social justice and political change.
Precisely. And you see this reflected in the art, literature, and music that emerged from that era. The Spanish Civil War wasn't just a historical event. It became a powerful symbol, a source of inspiration for those fighting against oppression. In their own context, it's a reminder that even in defeat, there can be seeds of hope, seeds of change waiting to be nurtured.
So if we step back and look at the Spanish Civil War through this lens of the butterfly effect, what are some of the key takeaways?
I think one of the most crucial lessons is the interconnectedness of events. How something that starts as a seemingly isolated incident, an assassination, a coup, can spiral into a conflict that draws in nations from across the globe.
It highlights how even small choices, those seemingly insignificant moments, can have profound and often unpredictable consequences. Makes you really wonder, what if?
Exactly. What if the League of Nations had acted more decisively? What if more countries had stood up to fascism in Spain? Could it have prevented the horrors of Franco's regime? Could it have altered the course of World War II? These are questions that historians continue to grapple with, and they underscore the importance of understanding history, not just as a series of events, but as a complex web of choices and consequences.
It's a sobering thought, realizing how fragile peace can be. How easily things can slip into chaos. And it really drives home the importance of vigilance, of actively engaging with the world around us, and recognizing the potential impact of our actions.
Absolutely. The Spanish Civil War serves as a stark reminder of what can happen when extremism takes root, when dialogue breaks down, and when the international community fails to act in the face of injustice.
So what can we do with this knowledge? How do we apply this understanding of the butterfly effect to our own lives?
I think it starts with awareness, recognizing that our actions, no matter how small they may seem, can have ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves. We have a responsibility to be informed citizens, engaged voters, and advocates for justice and peace, both within our own communities and on a global scale.
Because even the smallest act of kindness, the smallest gesture of courage, can have a positive impact. Just like those seemingly insignificant moments can lead to tragedy, they can also spark positive change.
Precisely. And by learning from the past, by studying the complexities and contradictions of history, we can hopefully create a better future, a future where the worst of history doesn't repeat itself.
This deep dive into the Spanish Civil War has been incredibly eye-opening. It's given us a lot to think about, both in terms of the historical events themselves and the broader lessons we can draw from them.
And it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to explore, so many stories waiting to be uncovered.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question to ponder. Knowing what we know now about the choices made, the paths not taken, different decisions or actions have changed the course of the Spanish Civil War, and perhaps even the world beyond.
Makes you think, about all those decisions, each turning point. What if those seemingly small moments had gone a different way? It's a question that can get the imagination going.
It is. Food for thought, for sure. A different Spain, a different Europe, maybe even a different world. It's a lot to think about.
It is, but I think that's the beauty of these deep dives. They help us think critically, challenge what we think we know, and look at things from different angles. Hopefully they inspire us to engage with the world in a more informed and thoughtful way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This deep dive into the Spanish Civil War has been a real eye-opener for me. And for our listeners who want to keep learning, we've got some great resources in the show notes. I especially recommend checking out some firsthand accounts from people who lived through this time. It really makes the history come alive.
Those stories are so powerful. They remind us that history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about the lives of real people, people caught in the middle of these big events.
Exactly. Those individual stories help us connect with history. And that's what makes it so interesting.
Totally agree. And as we face the challenges of today, I think understanding the past, with all its ups and downs, becomes even more important.
So until our next deep dive, keep those thinking caps on. Stay curious, and remember, even the smallest actions can have big consequences. It's a world where everything's connected, and we're all part of the story.